Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Macau, which goes down in China this weekend. Now, in regards to the start times for this event, these are always ones that I find the funniest because it proves that the European MMA fan base is more elite than you guys over in America and Canada, because we're the ones every single weekend that stay up till 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 o'clock in the morning our time, and yet the UFC China cards, the Korean cards, the Asian cards, a lot of these fight nights start very, very early in the US, and you guys aren't up to watch the first prelim, which is disappointing, but for us, it's great. The first prelim, I believe, starts at 8 a.m. UK time, which for Central European time, that'll be 9 a.m. And then for you guys in America, that's very likely to be around 3 a.m. in the morning, which I know you guys won't be up for. You need to do better. You need to be in that elite category with us European MMA fans. So that's the timings. I can't wait. Breakfast and fights. Love it. And then the last bit that I just quickly want to cover is the UFC gloves. So obviously the last event, the UFC decided to use the old gloves, and you can tell there's a difference. You really, really can. The gloves just hit harder, the old gloves that is. So yeah, look, Dana White said that the old gloves are going to be the new gloves, but apparently for this event and the UFC Tampa event, they are going to be using the new gloves as they've still got stock of them. I don't know all the reason. You know, Dana White's been speaking about this all weekend, and there seems to be a different reason each time that someone speaks to him about using the old gloves versus the new gloves, and it's absolutely fine. There probably is a million reasons why we should be using the old gloves, but for this event, I believe that they are going to be using the new gloves. And one of the reasons why, to me at least anyway, it makes sense is, look, we've got 3 Road to UFC finals. Road to UFC is the Asian tournament that the UFC put on, and it should be 4, but one of the fights got cancelled yesterday. But we've got 3 finals in the Road to UFC, and during the Road to UFC they were using the new gloves throughout the entire tournament. So it does make sense that, you know, for those fights specifically, that is the reason why the new gloves are being used for this event, because you can't have a certain pair of gloves throughout a tournament and then just change it in the final. Well, I mean, you could, but it just seems more, it makes more sense just to have those new gloves for this event because we've got the finals, and then we'll cover Tampa, UFC Tampa, in a couple of weeks' time, just to make sure that, you know, the gloves are going to be the new gloves, or maybe they've changed their mind again. I don't know. Very confusing with the old gloves, new gloves situation. But as far as I know, at the time of recording the podcast, I do believe they are going to be using the new gloves. So maybe the knockout rate for this event is slightly lesser than what we experienced last weekend, and obviously new UFC gloves as well. So hopefully that's not too confusing for everybody. Again, to summarise, as far as I know, the new gloves are going to be used for this event, but permanently going forward, it does look like we're going to be back to the old gloves, which is great. Like I say, there's a definite, you can tell there's a definite difference just with the way the punches land, with the noise that the punches make, and of course the statistics don't lie either. So yeah, that covers everything before we're getting into the breakdowns. Except for one last thing, of course, as always, before we break the fights down, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend and make some money whilst eating your bacon and sausage sandwiches or your full English breakfast, then make sure you check out MMAplay365.com. We've got something for everybody, whether you're a fun gambler that likes to play parlays and accumulators, build your own parlays. We've got parlay options. We've got a fun gamblers section for you guys. We've got recommended bets with full written breakdowns. We've got an official bet section, which is a section that tells you exactly where my money is going from the handicapper. And then all packages include Bayes AI as well, which is our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC event. Last weekend, it was 9-3, so 9 correct, 3 incorrect predictions. So another good weekend from Bayes AI, hoping to come back into China and start firing overseas. And then the best part of the subscriptions is they are all super affordable, as we want you to make your money back on what you're spending with us as quick as possible so you can start profiting on your bets. So check that out. That's all at MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promotion out the way, let's get breaking down some fights. And of course, as always, we start in the main event, and this is an absolutely fire main event in the bantamweight division. I love that we've got 5 rounds of this, or at least a potential of 5 rounds. We've got Petr Yan versus Deiveson Figueiredo. Now, I'm actually a little bit torn in regards to whether I would want the new gloves or the old gloves here, because look, with the new gloves, these guys are going to bang, and I think so might end up getting knocked out, especially over 5 rounds as well. But with the old gloves, we're not as likely to get the KO, which means that we're gonna have more of a chance of the fight going longer than what it would with the old gloves, because I just think it's going to be an absolutely amazing fight. Like, they're going to bang, they're going to throw heat, they're going to throw leather, but like I say, with the old gloves, there's less of a chance of a knockout, which means it's more likely that we're going to see the fight go longer, which, again, in my opinion, this is an elite fight in the bantamweight division. Like, Deiveson Figueiredo, since coming up from flyweight, he's looked great. You know, we've seen a mixture of, you know, the old Deiveson Figueiredo at flyweight, where he's dangerous, he's landing hard punches, he's, you know, really putting it on his opponents. But then we've also seen a wrestling and grappling version of Figueiredo. Of course, I'm referencing the Cody Garbrandt fight there. So, look, Figueiredo's in the elite of the elite, but so's Yan, and Yan has been for years. Like, Yan's just such a slick striker. And the only thing that I really can criticise from Yan's perspective is he can start fights quite slow and then build into them like he's a typical 5-round fighter. And this is another reason why I really like this fight at 5 rounds, because Deiveson Figueiredo, you can argue that he can sometimes do the same. He can sometimes start quite slow, but then he builds into these fights. And these elite fighters that have been former champions, they're former champions for a reason, because, again, they can fight and game plan perfectly over 5 rounds. I think these types of fighters are better over 5 rounds than they are 3 rounds, because once they've had those reads for the first, like, sort of 3 or 4 minutes, and then that first round's kind of gone, they just, again, once the reads are in, they just build into the fight so quickly, and then it's just a switch of pace, up a gear, and then they go. And again, from like a striking perspective, combination perspective, both of these fighters are just insane boxers in MMA, really good kickboxers as well, hard kicks. But I think from Figueiredo's perspective, he's more of a kicker, Yan's more of the boxer. But man, like, the styles are going to clash in a beautiful way inside the cage here between these two guys. Now, when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I'm actually expecting Figueiredo to come out here with a wrestling and grappling game plan, because we saw against Cody Garbrandt that Figueiredo doesn't mind trying his hand at trying to outstrike and, you know, hurt any opponent that's in front of him. But the issue that Figueiredo faced against Garbrandt, I think he's going to face here plus more as well. And that issue is simply that I just don't think he's going to be the better striker, and I don't think he's going to land more volume. And that's what he faced against Cody Garbrandt. Garbrandt won that first round against Figueiredo just by activity, volume. He was slightly faster as well. Now, I don't think Yan's quite as fast as Garbrandt, but I definitely think that Yan's going to have more speed than Figueiredo. But then when it comes from a technical striking perspective, I think Petr Yan's the better technical striker. And I think he's going to put up more volume, even though they can both start quite slow. I expect Yan to be landing more and throwing more than Figueiredo. And like I said, we've already seen that Figueiredo's smart in that last fight with Cody Garbrandt. In the second round, he came out knowing that he needs to get the fight down to the mat, because he didn't want to then go 2 rounds down and then have to find a finish. And of course, then he did take Cody Garbrandt down, and he got a good submission finish. So yeah, I think that Figueiredo, the first round getting reads in, I think he's going to drop that first round to Petr Yan striking. But then Figueiredo, I think, has got to come out wrestling and grappling. And the thing is, with Yan, we've seen a mixture of things with Yan defensively, wrestling and grappling. We've seen fights where he's looked absolutely phenomenal from a takedown defense perspective and getting back up to his feet. But then we've also seen fights where he can get taken down a little bit more than what you'd like. And then in some of those fights, he's given up a little bit more top control time than what you'd like as well. So we've really seen a mixture. And the thing is with Deiveson Figueiredo, for as a powerful a striker as people, will break his game down and talk about him, being the heavy hitter and really dangerous. Like, his wrestling and grappling is a really good attribute of his style. So I think both of these fighters match up really, really well. But it all comes down to, does Deiveson Figueiredo have success wrestling and grappling? But the thing is, that's not going to be his primary focus when he comes into the cage from a game plan perspective, in my opinion. So this is why I'm leaning towards Yan, because the first thing, before you even, try to make the, analysis or try to break down the fight of, does Deiveson Figueiredo be successful wrestling and grappling, he's got to activate that aspect of his game plan first, which, again, like I say, he'll be coming into this fight to strike and then make the in-cage adjustments on the fly if and when and should he need to. But that's if he actually activates that aspect of his game plan. Because if he doesn't, then I think Yan, pieces him up for 5 rounds, potentially finds a finish along the way. I genuinely think Yan's the better quality striker with more volume. So that's the first aspect of it. Then if he does activate that game plan, that's great. But then now we need to talk about how successful he is going to be wrestling and grappling. Well, I think he'll have some success throughout the fight. But is it going to be enough success? Is he going to be able to, over 5 rounds, be constantly on Yan, hitting takedowns, completing takedowns, getting top control time? Yan's going to stand back up after a couple of takedowns as well. Figueiredo's got to work to get him back down to the mat. Of course, Figueiredo hasn't got to worry about a massive weight cut anymore, so I think the cardio probably won't be too much of an issue with that type of game plan. But it's just how successful he's going to be constantly at Yan trying to take him down. Because one thing with Yan is, look, even though we've seen some fights where he is taken down more than you'd like, as I've already mentioned, Yan does a good job of, starting to see things coming at him when things happen more than sort of once, twice, 3 times. And I think if Figueiredo's shooting very similar takedowns throughout the 5 rounds, Yan's going to make reads on that and be able to defend a little bit more the longer the fight goes on. So, look, with wrestlers and grapplers, I often talk about how the longer the fight goes on, the more success they're likely to have. Well, I actually think this happens for Yan from a defensive perspective. I think the more Figueiredo shoots takedowns, I think the better Yan's going to get at defending them throughout the fight. So I do think Figueiredo's going to nick a couple of rounds here wrestling and grappling. I just don't think he steals 3 or 4 rounds. I think the majority of the action, the better work that we're going to see inside the cage is going to be within the striking department, and that's where I favour Yan. So for those reasons, I'm picking Petr Yan to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, it's actually not a featured co-main event, which is a little bit disappointing because I think it would have made a lot of sense from the location and with the style versus style clash that we've got here for this fight to be 5 rounds, but it's not to be. We've got Xiaonan Yan versus Tabatha Ricci. Now, Xiaonan, of course, she's going to be the striker here. Tabatha Ricci, she's more of the wrestler and grappler, and it's actually a really difficult fight to be confident in a prediction for the winner because, look, it's only 3 rounds. Like I said, I would have liked to have seen 5 rounds because we would have really seen one of these women really push that style, and one of the styles will have shone over 5 rounds, like 100%. But with 3 rounds, it's going to be easier for one of the fighters to potentially nick the fight, whereas 5 rounds I think would have given us a truer picture of which fighter and their style is more dominant over the other. And like I say, it's a complete stylistic clash. Yan Xiaonan's a striker. She's going to want to keep the fight on the feet, striking at all costs. And then you've got Tabatha Ricci, who, like I say, is absolutely the grappler here, and she's going to want to get the fight down to the mat at all costs. So it's which style, pushes through, which style is more prominent on the night. And it's one of these where, look, the betting line I think is way too wide at this point because of how live Tabatha Ricci is. Because that's, again, look, if Tabatha Ricci, if her style is the one that comes through here, she's going to look like the -200, -250 favourite. But if Yan Xiaonan comes through, and if she defends the takedowns and if she keeps the fight standing, then she's going to look like a minus 300 favourite. So again, it's one of these fights where one of these women is going to, whoever wins, is very likely that one of the women looks like a very big favourite. And I don't see too much in the middle, if I'm being honest. I don't think that it's going to be a mixture of both, where Ricci will get a couple of takedowns here and there, have some good top control time, but then Xiaonan will get back up to her feet and start lighting her up, and then that makes the rounds really close. I don't think we're going to see that. I genuinely feel that one of these women, the styles is going to shine through and through in this fight. So which one is it going to be? Well, that's the difficult question. That's the £1 million question, because if this fight is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, or at least predominantly a 15-minute kickboxing fight, then Yan Xiaonan wins this fight at a ridiculously high clip. But the issue with Yan Xiaonan is she's still got massive holes in a game when it comes to the wrestling and grappling. And when I watched that title fight back against Zhang Weili, before I watched the fight, I thought in my head that I remembered, Yan Xiaonan being absolute, a beast, stuffing takedowns, especially early on, and just absolutely steamrolling Zhang Weili a little bit until Zhang Weili started coming back into the fight. But that's not what I saw. Like, I saw Yan Xiaonan get taken down. The bits that I saw of developments and improvement from her is she hit a couple of sweeps, and then when she was on the feet, she was like the way better striker, like dropping Zhang Weili and hurting her. But the fight was much more clear for Zhang Weili than what I initially thought it was. I thought that fight was like super back and forth, and I remember watching, or at least I thought I remembered watching at the time, thinking, damn, we might actually have a new champion here. But then when I rewatched it, fresher mind, not caught up in the moment, yeah, it was very, very clear to Zhang Weili, and it was also very, very clear that Yan Xiaonan has still got these holes in a get-up game specifically. And this is where Ricci could really, really make this fight horrible for Yan Xiaonan, because, look, I don't think Ricci's got the best takedowns in the division, but she's serviceable. She can get fights down to the mat. And Yan Xiaonan's takedown defense, I don't think is actually horrific, but she's, more often than not, when she fights these types of fighters that once are on the mat, they can get her down on the mat. And I think with Ricci, she's got a really good top game that we just haven't seen so much of in the last couple of fights, because she's fighting more elite level competition, but she's also not fighting predominant strikers. So she's been able to test her boxing. And this is another thing, like Ricci's striking has also developed and improved as well. It's still not on the level of Yan Xiaonan, but it's developed enough where she's hanging more with the fighters towards the top of the division. But this is the first fight for Ricci in quite a while where she's going to be at a significant striking disadvantage, and I just cannot understand any other game plan here than Ricci coming in wanting to take this fight down to the mat. Now, if this was over 5 rounds, I would be picking Yan Xiaonan to win the fight, because I think over 5 rounds, that allows Yan Xiaonan to get some reads in for the wrestling grappling, start stuffing Ricci, make Ricci's morale drop inside the cage, and then start to take over. But over 3 rounds, I think it actually favours, or it doesn't favour Ricci as in like Ricci should be the favourite. I'm not saying that, but I think 3 rounds is better for Ricci than over 5 rounds, because all Ricci needs to do is nick around with the wrestling and grappling, which she'll absolutely, in my opinion, nick around here. And then she's got another round to potentially nick, which I think she could absolutely do as well. And then she's got a round that she can probably still try her best and maybe drop, but just be on that very decisive decision. So yeah, look, I don't love it against Yan Xiaonan just in general, because she is an elite fighter. I also don't love the fact that Ricci's away with Yan Xiaonan at home in China. But from a stylistic perspective, you can't ignore that Ricci's got a big, prominent, obvious path to victory if she wants to hit it. And like I say, over 3 rounds, she's got more chance of hitting it than she has over 5. So it's a tough fight to predict. It's a tough fight to break down, because I could also see Yan Xiaonan absolutely just lighting her up for 3 rounds. Ricci maybe not shooting any takedowns, or, both women here have got an obvious path to victory. And for that reason, I'm just going to side with the underdog. So I'm picking Tabatha Ricci to win this fight. And in the next fight, I like this fight quite a lot as well. The UFC are doing this more and more in regards to the veteran fights, and I do really like it. We've got Kenan Cong versus Muslim Salikhov. Now, like I say, it's a veteran fight, so it's not as if they're feeding Cong to a young, hungry killer that's, going to take him out, and it's not as if they're doing exactly the same with Salikhov. They're not feeding Salikhov a young, hungry killer that's likely going to take him out. Both fighters are in and around each other in regards to experience, age, and from Salikhov's perspective, it's not his first rodeo in China either. Salikhov spent a lot of his time, I think, in his early MMA career, in his kickboxing career in China, doing his work in Asia. I'm pretty sure he did. So, yeah, Salikhov, it's not his first rodeo this side of the world, and he's not fighting a young, hungry killer in Cong. And, the same goes the other way as well. So I think it's a well-matched fight. And from a stylistic perspective, I think it's a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. If anyone's going to go to the wrestling and grappling here, I think it's more likely to be Cong. But it's not a prominent feature of Cong's game. Like, yeah, we've seen him hit takedowns before. Yeah, we've seen him, wrestle and grapple. But he's an out-and-out striker. The only reason that I think he might go to the wrestling and grappling here is because I think Salikhov's going to be the better technical striker here. I genuinely think he's got more. I don't even know about power. Salikhov does pack power, but look, from a technical perspective, his movement, his shot selection, I think the speed's going to be close between them. But yeah, the movement and the shot selection, I think, is going to be on the side of Salikhov. And like I say, just being the better technical kickboxer than Kenan Cong. But it's not as if Cong's a million miles away from him either. So, this is what I mean. It's a good fight. But I could genuinely see a fight here that, if it goes 3 rounds, which again, if we're using the old gloves, there's more of a chance of this going longer than shorter. If these were the old UFC gloves, I could actually see an early knockout from either guy, because they both still pack power, even though, they're at the wrong end of the age scale, if that makes sense. But yeah, they still both pack power. But with the new UFC gloves, I do think that it's more likely, like I say, to go a little bit later, and therefore we're going to see, in my opinion, a really good showing from a striking perspective over 15 minutes. And because of that, you just got to ask yourself the question, well, who's the better striker? Who's the one that's going to be landing more volume? Who's the one that's going to be landing the better strikes? And I just think that falls on the side of Muslim Salikhov. Like I say, he's got a real background in kickboxing. He's got a lot of combat sports experience outside of MMA as well. And like I say, I just feel that if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, then you just have to side with Muslim Salikhov. I think Kenan Cong, for him, if this again is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, he's got to start landing some hard shots on Salikhov. Because the thing is with Salikhov, if he is getting hit hard and constantly hard, then he's one of these types of fighters that I think it drains his cardio a little bit. So I think if he's the one that's dictating the pace and the range of the fight, Salikhov I'm talking about, then I think Salikhov has a really comfortable fight from a cardio perspective. I don't think he is blowing or gassing when it gets into round 3, but if Cong's forcing Salikhov constantly to move backwards and then he's landing punches on him as well, then I do think that halfway through this fight, around the 7.5 minute mark, Salikhov will start to tire. And then if Salikhov hasn't won the first round, and he's probably not done as good in the start of the second round, then I think Cong could cruise to a victory here. But I just don't think it's going to be that easy for Cong. I really don't. Salikhov, like I say, has got a wealth of experience, not only in combat sports, but specifically the striking. And then he can wrestle and grapple to a certain degree as well. So it's like, if Cong does start shooting takedowns and decides to try and wrestle and grapple Salikhov, I think Salikhov will be able to deal with it. I don't think Cong's like this beast wrestler or grappler that's going to be able to, get into the holes of Salikhov's game within his wrestling and grappling. So, yeah, look, I think the fight's won and lost on the feet striking. I think Salikhov's the better quality striker with more experience in the striking department as well, more experience in combat sports. So, yeah, I'm siding with Salikhov here. I'm picking Muslim Salikhov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Wang versus Gabriella Fernandes. Now, this is one of the fights that I think the UFC know exactly what they're doing here. Gabriella Fernandes is, again, you talk about holes and weaknesses in the wrestling and grappling, and that's exactly where she's at. And now in her last fight, she did look a little bit better. Like, you can tell it's an area of a game that she's working on. But against someone like Wang, who's got really good takedowns, and she's wild on top with, how good she is with her topside grappling. I think she's going to be an absolute nightmare stylistic matchup for Gabriella Fernandes. It's going to be one of these fights that is going to get the Chinese crowd going absolutely wild here as well. Wang, even her striking's like really good. She's one of these fighters that I think could genuinely be a prospect. Like, when we first saw Zhang Weili, for example, you just knew that there was something with Zhang Weili where, she was going to work her way to the top of the division. She already had a great record before coming to the UFC as well. And I think Wang's going to be something very similar. I think that we are going to see Wang win a ton of these types of fights. Then I think she's going to have the step up in competition where we're all questioning, okay, well, now we're going to see exactly how good Wang is, but then we'll find out how good she is. Like, she's one of these fighters, up-and-coming fighters, that I think is a genuine danger and a genuine prospect in this division that is going to rise and rise. And it really wouldn't shock me at all to see Wang in a title fight at some point in her career, a UFC title fight, that is. So, look, I think from a stylistic perspective here, Wang's got a great fight ahead of her. Gabriella Fernandes, she can be dangerous striking, so Wang's got to mind her P's and Q's, but I just don't see Gabriella Fernandes just like putting a striking clinic on Wang or hitting her and dropping her and that changing the sort of course of the fight. I think Wang is going to be fine here. I think her striking's going to be more than good enough to be able to keep up with Gabriella Fernandes. But then once the wrestling and grappling starts coming out, I do worry for Fernandes in regards to, even if she gets through, a couple of rounds with Wang on top of her, I think Wang's going to be live for a finish, and I think she's going to be too much from a stylistic perspective as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Wang to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Volkan Oezdemir versus Carlos Ulberg. It's a bit of a random fight, this, in regards to the fight placement as well, and also the location. Like, it just so happens that Oezdemir and Ulberg are in quite a high-level fight, if I'm being honest, like at the top of the division. And it's a ranked fight as well, but they're doing it in China, and it's sort of nowhere near the top of the card, if that makes sense. Obviously, it's going to be main card, but it's not a co-main event or a main event or anything like that. So yeah, a bit of a random placement. But in regards to the fight itself, I think this is going to be a coming out party for Carlos Ulberg, if I'm being honest, because he's going to get tested here. In my opinion, like, Volkan Oezdemir will always be that stalwart type of guy that is going to test these fighters that are rising to the top of the division. And I think that he's going to provide a good test for Carlos Ulberg. I don't think Oezdemir is going to be a fighter where Ulberg comes in, touches him, and then he knocks him out, and, within the first sort of 60 to 90 seconds, and then, we're not seeing Carlos Ulberg fight minutes on minutes on minutes at this level in the UFC, which, if Ulberg does make it to, the top of the division, which again I think he's got a really good chance of doing, and he gets to a title fight, you want him to be accruing rounds and minutes and winning dominant decisions along the way. Because when you get to the main event, or when you get to the title fight, you need to be able to be confident in going 5 rounds, because you're fighting the elite of the elite, and it's those types of fights that really push you into places you've never been before. But in regards to this specific fight, look, I think Carlos Ulberg is the way better striker. He's got way more power. I think Oezdemir doesn't move enough to not be chewed up by Carlos Ulberg. I think where Oezdemir really needs to try his hand in this fight is by the wrestling and grappling, but that's not Ozdemir's predominant style of fighting. Yes, he can wrestle, and yes, he can grapple, but he really is a striker first before any of that. However, it is these types of fights where he's probably looking at Carlos Ulberg thinking, look, yeah, I can beat Carlos Ulberg striking. Like, these fighters in the UFC at the highest level have got elite mentalities where they won't think that an opponent's better than them anywhere. But I think realistically, Oezdemir will probably have a wrestling and grappling game plan put in place for if it doesn't work out on the feet. And it's okay to have a plan B. But I think that plan B will probably want to be exercised at some point in this fight. It's just, like I say, yes, I do think Oezdemir could get Ulberg down, but I just don't see... Look, I don't see Ozdemir's hand being raised at the end of the night because he's been a beast wrestler and a beast grappler for 15 minutes. and I don't think he gets Carlos Ulberg out on the mat either. Like I say, I don't see this fight being won and lost within the wrestling and grappling. I think it's going to be won and lost in the striking, and then it's hard to pick against Ulberg here because, like I say, he's a high quality kickboxer. He's got ridiculous power in his hands, both hands, his legs as well. And yeah, I think this is, like I said right at the start, I think this is going to be a real good coming out party for Ulberg, where he makes a big statement and then they really start to look at him at the top of the division. So for those reasons, I'm picking Carlos Ulberg to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ozzy Diaz making his UFC debut against Mingyang Zhang. Now with Ozzy Diaz, he lost to Joe Pyfer on the Contender Series. There's absolutely no shame in that. Joe Pyfer, especially at that level, is going to be very, very, very difficult to beat. But Ozzy Diaz has worked his way back into this UFC opportunity, coming back off that loss against Joe Pyfer. He went back-to-back wins, I believe, in LFA, both finishes as well, round 1, round 2. So Ozzy Diaz has earned his way into this UFC shot, which is great. I'm just not massively high on Ozzy Diaz as a fighter, and I think that he's going to struggle in the UFC, even at like the low to mid-range competition, because there's just there's traits of his game that I really hope he fixes, actually, because if he does, I do think that he could win fights in the UFC and have multiple years in the UFC. But just what I'm seeing right now is I'm just not overly thrilled at this level in the UFC. So like, he's leg kick heavy, which is good, and he can hurt his opponent's leg as well. But the issue is, off those leg kicks, he's kind of hittable on counters. We've seen him dropped, but it's on the feet. It's like low volume boxing. It's explosive moments. So, a lot of the fights, he's just not really doing too much in the void. Like in the moment, like he's fine. He's happy to exchange, and he's got explosive moments, hence why he's knocking guys out. Like you can't question that. But like I say, in the moments in the UFC when you're not being able to be explosive and these explosive moments aren't causing knockouts, you need to be active on the feet and throwing volume, and he just doesn't look like he's the type of fighter that's going to put up like 80, 90, 100 plus strikes over 3 rounds. And of course, you don't have to always output that amount of volume to win decisions, especially striking-based decisions, but you want to know that that's a possibility with the fighter. I just don't think it is with Ozzy Diaz. Now, in regards to the other side of his game, takedown defense is quite questionable. He can get taken down. But then flipping back to the good aspects, his energy management, because of the volume, I suppose, is decent. He can save his cardio. We don't really see him looking tired and expending his energy or anything like that. He can gradually pressure his opponents, and certain opponents he can break. But again, at this level in the UFC, I just don't think he's going to do that. And with Mingyang Zhang on the opposite side, Mingyang Zhang's not going to be waiting for anybody here. Zhang is going to want to come forwards. He's going to want to land hard punches. And I actually think it's a really good fight for Zhang, because I think where Zhang is going to really get unstuck is when fighters are wanting to take him down, get him down frequently, consistently, and spend time on top of him. I think that's where we start to see real tests for Zhang. But Zhang's got a good fight in front of him here, where he's going to have an opponent that's not going to overshoot takedowns. He might not even shoot a single takedown, but there's going to be standing in front of him, not throwing too much volume, but being able to be hit as well. And that's just like the perfect opponent for someone like Zhang, who moves quite well, is quite fast, has got deceptive power in the straight punches. And yeah, I just think stylistically it's a good fight for Zhang. And to be honest with you, I am expecting Zhang to get a knockout as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mingyang Zhang to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the road to UFC bantamweight final. We've got Su Yung Yu versus Balgyn Jeliasa. Now, Su Yung Yu, he looks like he's got clean striking, good fundamentals. He's got a good jab, hard straight right punch. He uses low kicks within his game, which is good. Comfortable movement. He'll wrestle. And when he does wrestle, he'll shoot, he'll drive. He's got good whizzer kicks as well in those fast moments where, he's drove in and he's shooting against the cage. And like I say, he's hit some good whizzer kicks. He's an educated scrambler as well. So when the fight does hit the mat, his grappling's decent. But he can leave openings for his opponent to stand up as well. So it's one of these types of fighters where you can see that there's a good level of grappling there, but he's not that heavy blanket on top. So like I say, he can be a nightmare on top, and his transitions are good, and when the fast moving scrambles are happening, he knows exactly what he's doing, but that doesn't stop his opponents from getting back up. Now, in regards to defensively, he can get taken down, but he does seem to have a decent get-up game, and he's one of these fighters where I think he's got a good all-round game with a slight lean on the wrestling, and he's got decent cardio to go along with the wrestling as well. So Su Yong-yu is a fighter that I think is, like I say, really well-rounded with an edge on the wrestling. Now, when you come to Jelly Asa, again, he's well-rounded as well. He'll sit down on his punches. He's got a really hard right hand. He'll fire hard low kicks as well. The only sort of negative trait that I found with Jelly Asa is he can leave his chin open when he's exchanging combinations. So, like I say, when he's throwing in those exchanges and he's throwing punches, he looks like he's going to be one of these fighters where if he fights someone that is also comfortable in the fire as well, in those hard exchanges, that they could potentially find a chin and an open chin as well. Now, Jelly Asa, from a wrestling perspective, he'll shoot sporadic takedowns. It's not really the forefront of his sort of game plans. His grappling looks okay as well, both offensively and defensively. But what I really like about Jelly Asa is that he's strong in the clinch as well. So, look, when you're sort of lining both of these fighters up and seeing which fighters, it's going to be a really close fight. I think both of these fighters are in this road to UFC final for a reason. I don't see a massive amount of edge here in regards to, I don't think one fighter is going to absolutely dominate the other. I think it's going to be a close and competitive decision. So when you are looking at the betting lines, if one of these fighters does move into a good, plus money underdog spot, then it could be a good bet, just because if it's one of these fights that ends up going to a split decision, you always want to be on the side of the plus money underdog. But from a straight pick and prediction perspective, I'm not going to sit on the fence. I will side slightly with Su Yong-yu, just because, like I say, I like the wrestling edge, and that's normally the edge that I lean towards in a close fight, that I think they match up well from a striking perspective, offensively, defensively. They match up well from, a grappling perspective. In just being fighters in general, they're both well-rounded, they've both got good qualities. I think that Jelly Asa's got the slight edge on the strike, and I think that Su Yong-yu's got the slight edge on the wrestling. And more often than not, in these close fights, I will lean with the wrestling. But like I say, if it's one of these fights that we end up getting like a plus 150 underdog by the time we come to fight night, then that's absolutely the side to bet on if you are insistent on betting on this fight. But for a pick and prediction, I'm picking Su Yong-yu to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another road to UFC final. This time we're in the flyweight division. We've got Kiru Sahota versus Dong Hoon Choi. Now, Kiru Sahota's a fighter that I know quite well, actually. He's did his regional scene in a promotion called Cage Steel, which is in my hometown of Doncaster. I think he only lives, maybe 20, 30 minutes away from where I live as well. So Sahota he's also got a brother as well, Pav Sahota. So the Sahota brothers are fighters that, being around the game in the UK regional scene in Yorkshire, South Yorkshire and Doncaster, they're definitely fighters that anybody that's been in this scene knows. So it's really good to see Sahota do quite well. Now, with Sahota, he was one of these fighters I was actually pleasantly surprised of how well he's done in this tournament. Not that I thought he was going to go in and flop or anything, but the thing is with Sahota is I don't think he'd really tested himself and had wins against these big tests before jumping into this tournament. So I was very sort of on the fence of how he's going to look. And again, that's not, I don't mean to cause offence with that. It's just, like I say, when you really step up in competition, it either makes a fighter or breaks a fighter. And with Sahota, it's actually made him, in my opinion. Because, like I say, his only real step up in competition he had prior to this was the fight that he lost. So Sahota is coming here. He looks, honestly, he's been looking sharp in this tournament. Good everywhere. He's massive for the division as well. Remember, these are flyweights, so 125 pound. He's 5'10", so he's got an absolutely huge frame for this division. Like 5 foot, you don't start seeing 5'10" and for a couple of weight classes above. But Sahota, I think, is going to be very tricky to deal with because of his size. And then you look at the reach and the leg reach as well. Like, he's got a huge height, reach, and leg reach advantage, not just over his opponent here, but he'll have all these huge advantages over every flyweight. Now, what comes with that is, look, Sahota trains at Manchester Top Team, and I like that quite a lot, because at Manchester Top Team there's a lot of good quality bodies for him to be able to train with. Like, for example, just picking one name out, like a Lerone Murphy. Like, they've got UFC fighters at Manchester Top Team, so the bodies that he gets to work with on the mats every single day is going to have him well prepared. And that's probably why we've seen him really develop and elevate his game in this tournament. He's tall, he's long, like we've already discussed. His movement's also quite elusive on the feet as well. He'll switch stances, he mixes his attacks up well. He knows that the straight punches are a big weapon for him because of his frame. He fires the hard kicks at range, at kicking range. Again, just being able to use that distance management. Being tall is really key. If you can really use your height and your reach to your advantage with the distance management, then you're onto a winner. If you've got that sort of frame. His striking looks quite clean. He's fast. He'll engage in clinch exchanges. Again, even though he's got a tall frame, he seems to be quite strong in the clinch as well, which is really good. And against the cage, he will grind. He's got good takedown defense. Obviously, it's going to be tough to take someone like Sahota down because he's so tall. Now, the only negatives that I've seen from him is, look, with the tall man defense, I don't think it's like a massively worrying thing, but we have seen at times he'll exit out of an exchange where his chin's up in the air, his hands are down, and he's sort of leaning back. So that type of tall man defense, you can see it's there, but I don't know if it's going to be that much of a problem at this level in the UFC. Now, flipping over to his opponent, Dong-Hoon Choi, looks like he's got a judo background. He'll look to clinch, trip, drag and throw his opponents down to the mat. He can get stuck on the cage in the clinch, which again, this is where you start to see some stylistic advantages, in my opinion, for Sahota, because Sahota's quite good in the clinch from what I've seen, whereas Dong-Hoon Choi can get stuck in the clinch. But then on the flip side to that is, do you really want to be spending too much time in the clinch against someone that's got a judo background that'll look to trip and throw you? And again, because Sahota's quite tall, it's going to be difficult for opponents to single leg and double leg him. So the way to get a tall guy down is probably by trips and throws. So Dong-Hoon Choi is going to have some advantages himself from the judo, but then I think inside the clinch it's going to be Sahota with the advantages, and this is what's going to make the fight really, really competitive. Now, when it comes to the striking, I think that Sahota has got the biggest gap in skill here with the striking. I think Dong-Hoon Choi still looks somewhat green, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He's still just in a developmental stage of his career where I'm just not sure he's UFC caliber just yet. Now, does that mean he can't win fights in the UFC? Well, no, it doesn't. He will still win some fights in the UFC, especially if he's developing as well. But he, like I say, he just looks still green a little bit. And with Sahota, from what I've seen of him, he looks ready for this opportunity. And that's the difference between both fighters. I think one is absolutely ready and is going to be super well prepared. I think the other one still needs a little bit of work to be fully comfortable and ready for this UFC opportunity. So again, when you're matching them both together, yes, I think that Dong-Hoon Choi is going to have some advantages in this fight. Like, he's not a bad fighter. He's got a good skill set. It's just I think Sahota's going to be more ready, more prepared. I think he's going to be the more difficult fighter to beat out of the two as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kiru Singh Sahota to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the final road to UFC final for this card, and this time we're in the women's strawweight division. We've got Feng Xiaocan versus Ming. Now, I really like what I see from Feng Xiaocan. I think she's a really, really good fighter. And just like what I've said with Kiru Sahota actually in the last breakdown, Feng Xiaocan is tall, she's rangy, she looks slick striking. And it's going to be a very similar type of breakdown actually, because like I say, tall, rangy, she's a southpaw as well. She's a slick striker, clean strikes, good low kicks. Again, another fighter that's tall and rangy that we can recognise the straight punches that are going to be good, and again, firing kicks from range as well. You know, the strikes come fast. She's done work at Team Alpha Male before as well. She's difficult to take down on the cage. Again, with the single legs, the double legs, she's tall, she's long. It's always going to be difficult to get those fighters down on the cage. Now, she can be a little bit susceptible to leg kicks in the open mat. So when they're exchanging, if her opponent does, level change, get in at the single leg and quickly try and take her down. But on the brief moments we have seen with her on the mats, she does react well. She doesn't settle with both shoulders on the mat. She does try and get back up to her feet. But when you're looking at weaknesses, her definite weakness is within the grappling. So I'm hoping that, look, I think she's going to be absolutely fine in this fight, but I'm just hoping that as she progresses in the UFC, if she does really tighten up on this wrestling and grappling defense, she could be a nightmare. A type of fighter that we've seen from, Yan Xiaonan. She's a fighter that's cleaned up the wrestling and grappling over the years, and now it's only the elite fighters that can really capitalize on that wrestling and grappling deficiencies within the game. And I think the same thing with Feng Xiaocan here. Now with Ming on the other hand, the striking looks okay. She's more kick heavy than anything else. Taekwondo background, it seems, at least from what the commentators were saying, although the style doesn't really scream Taekwondo to me, if I'm being honest. But I'm pretty sure as well, when the MC announced Ming in the last fight, they said that she was a wrestler, and I didn't see any of that, if I'm being honest. It definitely looked more towards her being a striker. She can get taken down easily as well, which again is another reason why I thought, well, that doesn't scream wrestler to me. Grappling's hit and miss defensively, so she can get back up to her feet at times, but she can also be exposed on the mat as well. From the feet, striking, going back to that, low volume. I don't think she's going to be too dangerous anywhere here for Feng Xiaocan. I don't think that she's definitely not the better striker. I think she's got lesser volume. I think she's going to struggle to get into range. And she's one of these types of fighters that will point score as well, Ming. So, again, with a split decision type of style, I just think this is a really good fight for Feng Xiaocan. I'm not surprised she's a heavy favourite. If she was anything, even under minus 200, I'd be absolutely slamming this, because I think she's a really good fighter, and she's got a really good fight ahead of her here stylistically as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Feng Xiaocan to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Carlos Hernandez versus Nyamjargal Tumendemberel. So Tumendemberel was supposed to fight Andre Lima a few months back, and I think Andre Lima was like minus 200 or something like that, and I actually had a breakdown written ready for Andre Lima, and I was going to absolutely smash that minus 200 line, but then the fight fell through. I was a little bit disappointed, because that was probably about as comfortable as it's going to get when you're betting on a fighter in the UFC. So Tumendemberel, though, I actually like Tumendemberel as a fighter. I think he's super entertaining. I think he's going to be an instant fan favourite. Comes in to every fight looking to bang. He'll expend energy. He's got a good gas tank as well. And yeah, like I say, he'll come in, he'll get in the face of his opponents. He's got loads of quick knockouts, which, again, in the lower weight classes is something you don't see all the time. So yeah, I think Tumendemberel is a fighter that, like I say, he's going to be a fan favourite. He's going to be entertaining. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing him fight as well. The issue is he's got Carlos Hernandez on the other side. Now, when it comes to the striking, I think Tumendemberel is going to absolutely be more dangerous than Carlos Hernandez. I don't know whether he's got more volume. That's the jury's still out there. But I think that Tumendemberel is definitely the more dangerous striker. The problem with Tumendemberel, and the reason why I was going to absolutely nail that minus 200 line that Andre Lima had against him, is because Tumendemberel has shown massive holes and weaknesses with his defensive wrestling and grappling. Now, it's weird, because offensively Tumendemberel can wrestle and grapple, but the problem is when he's fighting an opponent that is very comfortable wrestling and grappling and is fast as well, they're just going to absolutely have the way with him. It's like, you look at Tumendemberel's last fight in Road to UFC, he had a Thai fighter in front of him, a fighter where the commentary team was saying, okay, well, yeah, this Thai fighter, he really needs to develop his wrestling and grappling, because he's got all the striking, but the wrestling and grappling is gonna be what holds him back, or something along those sort of lines. Then this Thai fighter starts taking him down in round 2 and round 3 and having loads of top control time over him. So I'm thinking, well, if you've got a predominant striker that the commentary team has spotted massive holes and flaws in their offensive wrestling and grappling, and they can wrestle you and grapple you comfortably, then what is someone like Carlos Hernandez going to do, who can absolutely wrestle, and his grappling is absolutely good as well? Now, does Carlos Hernandez wrestle and grapple guys in the top 20, 25, 30 of the division? It gets tough at that stage for Hernandez. But for here, fighting someone like Tumendemberel on his UFC debut, I think there's a massive gap in skill, a massive hole in Tumendemberel's wrestling and grappling. Now, you've got to imagine that Tumendemberel is improving this aspect of his game as well, but looking at where he's training, he looks to still be in his home country of Mongolia, and I just don't know at what level they're going to have that wrestling and grappling sharpened up in this short space of time. So, look, I think that Hernandez has got to mind his P's and Q's with the striking, because you can't sleep on Tumendemberel's power. But I think if Carlos Hernandez doesn't get knocked out earlier, I think he absolutely cruises within that wrestling and grappling against Tumendemberel. And if Carlos Hernandez doesn't, and he stands and strikes for 3 rounds and ends up losing, it could be one of the worst fight IQ displays we've ever seen, because there is a clear path to victory for Carlos Hernandez should he decide to take it. And you would hope at this level, at the UFC, that the fight IQ is there enough to be able to take that opportunity. So for those reasons, I'm picking Carlos Hernandez to win this fight. And in the next fight, this fight's going to be fucking nuts. We've got 2 UFC debuts being made here, both super high pace, super powerful. We've got Lonnie Kavanagh versus Jose Ochoa. Now, like I say, from how they match up, I just can't see anything but explosive here. Like, you look at Jose Ochoa, he's a quick mover, explosive striking, creative striker as well. He can be wild on the feet, he's got deceptive power, he's got a good tie clinch, plum clinch, he's got knees, he can fight in southpaw, he kicks a lot, he's got good striking defense. He stalks forwards. Like, he's a super aggressive fighter that's got explosive, creative, wild, powerful striking. Guess what? Lonnie Kavanagh is exactly the same. His speed's insane. His power's good. Like I say, everything I've just mentioned with Jose Ochoa, you can say exactly the same things about Lonnie Kavanagh as well. Then when you look at the wrestling and grappling, so look, Jose Ochoa's got good takedown defense. He doesn't settle off his back. He can scramble back up to his feet. He's one of these creative, opportunistic guys. He trains out of shooter box Diego Lima. So again, the same camp as your Charles Oliveira and all those guys that are in the UFC. I'm not going to name them all, but there's plenty of the shooter box guys under Diego Lima in the UFC. And Jose Ochoa just looks to be another one of these guys. Now, again, you can say the same thing with Lonnie Kavanagh. His wrestling's good. His grappling's good. I think if this fight does end up being a wrestle and a grapple fest, though, I think it's definitely more likely to be on Lonnie Kavanagh, and I think that's why Lonnie Kavanagh is a sizable favourite here, because genuinely, when you look at both of these fighters striking, it could be any of them that get caught. It really, really could. They're both so aggressive, so fast, so creative, so powerful. It could be any of them. So then when you start to really dissect why Lonnie Kavanagh is a sizable favourite here, I think the wrestling and grappling comes into play. I think that, look, although Ochoa can defend takedowns, and he's obviously going to have a great, body of work in his fight camp training with guys like Charles Oliveira and these guys that are high-level grapplers, I just think that Ochoa might be one of these grapplers that maybe gets taken down and gets a little bit too comfortable off his back, while Lonnie Kavanagh is staying safe on top and racking top control time up. So I do think we're going to see a mixture of the martial arts here. I do think it's going to be wild on the feet. I think it's going to be a front runner for fight of the night, absolutely. But I think when all is said and done, when the fight's so close and you're looking for those slight edges, I've got a funny feeling that Lonnie Kavanagh is going to have some wrestling in his back pocket here. So that's the way that I'm going to side. I'm picking Lonnie Kavanagh to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Zhao Long versus Quang Li. Now, Long Zhao, he lost his road to UFC final last time out in the UFC. It was a split decision. It could have gone either way. I genuinely thought he'd won the fight, if I'm being honest. But on the feet, he's aggressive. He's a powerful striker. He's happy to exchange. But he's well-rounded, and he has rounded his game out, especially in that last fight in the UFC. Of course, like I say, it was the road to UFC final, but it was on a UFC card. I think in my analysis on that last fight, I did expect him to have some difficulties, with the wrestling and grappling. But like I say, it looks like he's rounded his game out. He's a good pressure fighter, and he'll shoot takedowns now himself. Like I say, he's rounded his game out, and he's really become more of a well-rounded fighter, which you need to be in the UFC. Now, the grappling still needs a little bit of work offensively and defensively, and he's got a good level of takedown defense. He can turn a little bit grindy at times as well. But like I say, from someone that's a predominant striker, he's really done a good work in rounding his game out. Now, with Quang Li on the other side, he's got decent striking as well. He'll sit down on his punches, he'll mix in kicks, and the issue that I have with Quang Li is he tends to go shot for shot, which is quite a point scoring style, and one of these, if you two guys who fight shot for shot, strike for strike, fight each other, you're going to end up on a split decision if no one's knocked out with one of the shots. And the split decision could go either way because it'll be almost impossible to distinguish a winner between the two. He can be forced backwards a little bit. He's got opportunistic takedowns. He can grind with cage work. He hopped the back of Chris Gutierrez on his UFC debut, and he can blanket on top as well. So this is why both of these fighters actually, match up quite well together. And I could see another type of really close split decision here in regards to, like I say, I think that Long Zhao is going to be probably the better striker here. I think Quang Le might go more to the wrestling in this fight than he's done in previous fights. But like I say, I wouldn't be surprised for Long Zhao to mix things up either. So when I'm looking to predict a winner out of these two fighters, I'm looking for the fighter that is, in my opinion, more well-rounded and the fighter that is going to be slightly more comfortable wherever the fight goes. I think that, look, it's tough to really put too much stock into Quang Le's last fight because it was Chris Gutierrez, and you're not going to expect Quang Le to win that fight, just like you wouldn't expect Long Zhao to win that fight either. But like I say, I just there's something about Long Zhao. I do like him. I think that he's blending everything together a little bit better as he's rounding his MMA game out and his skill set as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Long Zhao to win this fight. And in the next fight, the last fight to break down of this podcast of the card, we've got Maheshate versus Nicholas Motta. And this is a difficult one to predict again as well because, look, both fighters have been somewhat inconsistent in the UFC. Both fighters I actually had really high hopes for coming into the UFC as well. Like with Maheshate, for example, I cashed him as an underdog in his UFC debut against Steve Garcia, which talk about wins that just age absolutely amazingly. Like Steve Garcia's on an absolute tear right now. He's fighting Edson Barboza, I think, in his next fight. And the last loss that Steve Garcia took, I believe, was Maheshate by knockout. So, like I say, talk about fights that age well. That's a fight that's aged beautifully for Maheshate. It's just, unfortunately, after that, he's had inconsistent performances. And it's the same with Nicholas Motta. Like, Nicholas Motta looked like an absolute beast before coming into the UFC. And, of course, it didn't quite go his way for his first couple of fights, but it looks like he's starting to find his feet now, and I actually quite like how this fight's been matched up because I think both fighters are catching each other at a really interesting time. They're both well matched from a skill set perspective, so I don't see there being too much edges between both guys, but I just think that they're both catching each other at a decent time. They've both struggled early in the UFC career, apart from obviously that win for Maheshate against Steve Garcia, but they've both had the moments that have struggled early on in the UFC career. They've both got beaten a couple of times. They've both come back from, taking losses, that adversity, and coming back and getting wins in the UFC as well. So I think they're matching up probably at the right time. The reason why I'm siding with the fighter I'm going to side with, which is Maheshate, by the way, is because I just think that although Nicholas Motta's more well-rounded and he's got slightly more ways to win this fight, I don't think he's going to be as dominant with the wrestling and grappling as what he probably should be here. And I've also got reservations in regards to the durability. Like if these two stand and trade in the middle of the cage, which there's absolutely every chance of that happening, then I trust Maheshate's chin to hold up more than what I do Motta's. And I think Maheshate packs a little bit more power as well. Maybe Motta's slightly faster. So like I say, I think it's going to be a close and competitive fight, but I also think there's going to be some heated exchanges. And I think at some point, one of them is going to catch the other one. Maybe if they don't knock him clean out, maybe if they just rock them, daze them, but that changes the course of a fight in itself. I just think Maheshate is going to be better in the fire in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Maheshate to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Once again, and as always, thank you for everybody that tunes in. Thank you for everybody that drops a comment onto our YouTube videos as well. I always try my best to get back to everybody, as it is me that answers those comments. And like I say, I have busy weeks every single week with the other work that I do in MMA in this space. So I do try and get back to everybody that posts something that's that's positive, that's debate-like, that's worth replying to. So yeah, like I say, drop a comment if you disagree with any of my picks or if you agree with any of my picks, if we're on the same side. It's always good to know that we've got each other's support out there. And also for you guys over the seas as well, in the US, in Canada, if I am wrong about you, if you are in the elite MMA fan category and you are going to be getting up at 3 a.m. Eastern time or early in the morning, wherever you are at that side of the world, if you're going to be getting up super early for that first prelim of the night, then make sure you tell me I'm wrong and that you're in the elite UFC fan club. So yeah, make sure you tell me if I'm wrong. And of course, if you're listening onto one of the podcast platforms, then make sure you drop over to YouTube as well if you do want to leave a comment. And again, tell me I'm wrong, that you're in the elite fan category. And like I say, if you're over on YouTube, please drop a subscription to the channels. It really helps us. One last time, if you're wanting to get into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for everybody. All the packages are super affordable. You just need to choose whether you want one event, whether you want to pay monthly, or the annual is like $99 for the entire year. So make sure you take advantage of that. That's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.